there certainly has been mixed reactions to the long-awaited appointments of the 7th administration's cabinet posts. This after the country held its national and provincial elections on the 29th of May, followed by President Cyril Ramaphosa's inauguration, which was last month. Now there are expectations that the government of national unity will stimulate the country's economic growth for the next 5 years, stabilise the markets and create much-needed jobs. To talk more about what the new cabinet means to the economy, let's have a chat to Dawie Roodt. He, of course, is the chief economist at the Efficient Group. Dawie, so good to have you. Talk to us. What's been the reaction so far from perhaps international markets? I know ours are all still waking up, but talk, how are we looking?
Good morning. Well, quite a long night to wait for the president again. But one of the first things I do every morning is to look at the international press, and the international press so far is quite optimistic and positive about the announcement of this new government for South Africa. I've also read a couple of reports on international analysts, and the majority of them are actually quite positive about this. One particular report that I picked up this morning was about an international investor, well, asset manager mostly, and he made a comment that previously South Africa was not even on his emerging market list, and now suddenly South Africa is back as a possible investment destination. So the reaction internationally is quite positive. Looking at the financial markets, the rand strengthened over the weekend. There is some trading. There was some trade over the weekend, up and down a little bit on the currency. But this morning I see the rand is about 10 cents, 12 cents stronger than where it was on Friday, for example. And more importantly to me is the capital market. And the capital market gained quite nicely. It will be very interesting to see what's going to happen this morning. I think the equity market will really tell us what the financial markets think about this new cabinet that has been announced last night. So overall, quite positive. Looking at the various positions that the new ministers and deputy ministers, that's quite a mixed bag, a couple of surprises here and there. But I think the real test now is, will they be able to work together? Because the previous 2 weeks or so was quite hair-raising in some instances, and it's quite clear that the various political parties they're really having some difficulty to come to this eventual announcement of the new cabinet. So I guess today is going to be interesting to see how especially the equity market is going to react.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see these ministers rocking up at their new offices and new residences and taking up all of these new responsibilities. But I want to break it down a little further and try and sort of focus mostly on the financial side of things and the economy. So let's start off with the finance ministry. Obviously no changes there in the minister, and I think that was widely expected. Enoch Godongwana, I think on both sides, I mean, the two parties in terms of the ANC and the DA saying that he needs to finish his job, and the deputy minister as well. However, we have the introduction of a second deputy minister, in the form of Ashor Sarapin, who's from the DA. Well, what do you think of this? I mean, let's talk about that.
Okay, let's talk about the minister first, Enoch Godongwana. I think he's the best that the ANC can offer in that specific position, so there's no surprise there. I think that was a very good decision to retain him as the minister itself. But remember that the finance is a very important department. I would say finance, after the president himself, is probably the most important position in cabinet. The finance is where the buck stops, and that's quite often it's finance and treasury that stop many ministers that want to go on a spending spree in many instances. But also keep in mind that finance or the treasury is important for the biggest fund on the African continent, that's the PIC. And the Deputy Minister of Finance is mostly responsible for the PIC. And that will be really interesting to see who's going to take over that responsibility. Will it be the ANC's deputy or will it be the DA's deputy? Also, how will they work together, these two deputies? So like I said, this is a crucially important department. South Africa's finances we are in very deep trouble when you talk about state finances, and you and I, we've spoken about this many times before, and we need to make some significant changes as far as state finances are concerned, and it mostly comes down to one thing, and that is to cut back on state spending. So who's going to take what responsibility in that specific department? I'm referring specifically to the new deputies. That's going to be quite interesting to see how the minister is going to divide the responsibilities between those two deputies. And like I've said, the PIC is also actually the responsibility of Treasury and what's going to happen there, because that is the biggest pot of gold on the African continent.
Yeah, certainly. But one has to ask as well in terms of the power of a deputy, because, you know, we've always looked at the deputy minister and thought, what do you really do? Do we honestly need deputy ministers? Now we have two, and now we're worried about whether they're going to get on or not. So this is going to add a very interesting dynamic to, as you say, one of the most important, if not the most important portfolio. The role of a deputy minister in all of this?
Well, traditionally in South Africa, what happened, or not traditionally perhaps, but a couple of cases in South Africa's past, that the deputy would simply usually take over from the minister. In fact, if you look at Pravin Gordhan, for example, he started off at SARS, then he became the Minister of Finance eventually, and that's the career path of many people in finance. And there's good reason for that, because you need this financial kind of background. What will happen now? Will these two deputies, will they eventually take over? One of them will eventually take over from a minister, perhaps, maybe, going forward. And it's also important to understand that there's a huge machinery behind in the minister, in Treasury. It's not only a matter of the minister sitting one evening and write down a budget, for example. It's something that continues right through the year. So there's huge support behind the Minister of Finance and his new deputies as well. Yeah. So changing the minister itself, it's not always going to change that much. It is important, like I've said, but keep in mind that there's a huge apparatus behind and working behind the Minister of Finance and trying to put all the finances and keep everything together in the Department of Finance, because it's such a crucial and very important department.
Without a doubt.
There's a lot of depth there.
Yeah. Let's talk about electricity and energy, because now we're talking about a very troubled sector in this country when it comes to electricity. So here we've now seen a formation of electricity and energy as one department. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, who was the Minister of Electricity, is heading this, along with Samantha Graham from the DA. So this one is going to be an interesting one. To privatize or not to privatize? That's the question.
Yeah, I must tell you, Ramokgopa actually, initially I didn't like him that much as a minister, but he started, I think he did quite a good job at Eskom, particularly the last couple of months. And I'm actually quite optimistic about that department. You made a very important point, and that's a point about privatization, which is actually happening in South Africa. Not because it's part of policy or because it's part of the ideology, but it's simply because there's no other option. The private sector is just taking over the generation of electricity in South Africa. I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more private sector participation, not only at Eskom, but we're going to see more private sector participation in many of the other state-owned enterprises, like, for example, Transnet as well. So that will be interesting to see what's going to happen there as well. But yeah, interesting to get a DA person in there. But I think what is clear is that South Africa's the state-owned enterprises have been mismanaged for many, many years, and that we are in the process of getting more private sector participation. And that creates a lot of opportunities for the private sector as well.
So obviously that's where we see Eskom, because there's obviously going to be a lot of changes when it comes to state-owned enterprises and how they are managed. We'll get more detail and meat as that goes along, because we see transport as well. And I mean, we need to sort out the transport system. We need to look at Transnet and overhaul this and say, right, we've got to get that going. Barbara Creesy's in that position, and there's an interesting one, because she was not previously in that portfolio, but I just want to see who her deputy is. Please give me a moment. I sort of caught myself off guard. Yes, Kate, do you know it? We'll get it. So, Klengwa. Okay, so we've got two both from there. Nkululeko Klengwa, he is going to be in that position as well as transport. Very important position, that one.
Very importantly, it's not only the minister and the deputy ministers there, but all the various CEOs at the various SOEs. Yeah. Like, for example, the new SOE at Transnet, I think she's doing an excellent job. And if she can get the political support to continue with what she started, I think that can make a huge difference in the way that Transnet is run. I'm actually quite optimistic about Transnet. So it's not only the political heads that we have to be talking about. We should be talking about the CEOs of the various state-owned enterprises as well. And I think we've turned a corner, and I'm actually turning quite optimistic about South Africa's economic future. Yeah,
so Nkululeko Klengwa, just to confirm, is from the IFP. He'll be running with that portfolio as well. So this is an interesting part in history we certainly do stand here, because, you know, we're looking at honestly bringing a lot of people together and making this work. I want to get your interpretation, though, of you've got the DA leader, who's now the Minister of Agriculture. What do you think about that? Some people are waking up this morning, and I wonder how John is waking up this morning feeling. How important is that portfolio, though? I mean, if we think about agriculture, we've got to eat every single day, and that's food security. But perhaps you can talk to me. Is that an important portfolio for him?
Yeah, I just want to, if I may, say something about education as well, because that is also crucially important. But yes, agriculture, well, the size of the contribution of agriculture to the South African economy is much less today than when it was 100 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. And that makes sense, because that's how economies evolve. The secondary and the tertiary economies become more and more important as economies become wealthier. But it doesn't mean that agriculture is not important. It is very important because of things like, for example, food security. You mentioned that. But I just want to mention that South Africa's farmers, you get two groups of farmers in South Africa. You get the commercial farmers, and they are hugely successful. They are of the best in the world. And then you get the emerging farmers in the economy, and they need a lot of support in the economy. And I would really like to see how the new Minister of Agriculture is going to tackle that problem, because that is where the issues are with agriculture in terms of development, and that's on the smaller farmers that are trying to become commercial farmers. But as far as the commercial farmers are concerned, all you need to do is just to give them support. They are up and running and doing an excellent job. I wanted to say something about education.
Please,
if there's a spot on that. Yes, education is a very interesting one for me, because education is the biggest expense item to the Minister of Finance. And you and I, we've been talking about the so-called economic cluster now. But keep in mind, education is a lot of money going to education. And now we have at education, we have I think a DA minister at education now. And education is interesting from a political perspective, because COSATU is very strong in COSATU. South Africa's Democratic Teachers Union is a very powerful union, and they are at education. And it will be interesting to see how the new minister and, well, essentially COSATU, how they're going to be able to get together in this new ministry.
So I just want to ask you as well, in terms of, you know, we saw that obviously the DA wanted trade, industry and competition. That was the one, that was the sticking point. It was a very big one. We see Parks Tau on this particular ministry.
Yes.
Talk to me about this, because, I mean, this is also a very, very important one. And how crucial is this ministry? Of course, this is for foreign direct investment as well.
Yeah. It's relatively easy to well, it's not, I guess it is ideologically driven to an extent, but it's relatively easy to make some significant changes when you are in charge of that specific ministry. All you need to do is change some import tariffs or, for example, and you can have a huge impact on the South African economy. Also keep in mind that the previous minister, Patel, when he was Minister of Trade and Industry, his basic approach was to protect South Africa's industries. And in the process, a lot of things became quite expensive for South Africans. And I would argue that he actually disrupted the financial markets at various levels while during his time as the Minister of Trade and Industry. So yeah, it's still under control of the DA. And it will be interesting to see how the new minister is, whether he will continue on the same path that the previous minister of Trade and Industry set, because I think that was quite damaging to the South African economy. I hope they're going to do things a little bit different this time around.
Yeah. Finally, I'm going to let you go after this one, but of course, Gwede Mantashe, mineral and petroleum resources. Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, the reality is that he's a big shot in the ANC.
Yeah.
You need to give him a space somewhere. He was a disaster previously. I don't see much happening in that space. Yeah, unfortunately, he's there again. Yeah, that's. I guess that's the reality of politics.
Yeah, indeed, and yeah, that's where we'll have to leave it. But Dawie, thank you. Thanks so much for talking to us about some of those appointments, key appointments. We'll continue talking about those, but we were looking very much so at the economic ones. It seems that the international media have bought into this. The markets look like they're enjoying it, but let's get the wheel to the ground and see how it actually pans out as people go to work now and get these departments running. Dawie Roodt, Chief Economist at Efficient Group, thank you for giving us your post-cabinet appointment analogy and how the economy is going to react to all of this.